So you've decided your loved one needs to go into a memory care or an assisted living. They definitely need to not be at home alone. It's not safe anymore. And now you've chosen the great location. You've picked an assisted living, a memory care, a skilled nursing facility, and it's moving day. Or it's getting close to moving day because there are some things that you need to do beforehand. So I brought today my good friend Jeff Linville from Next Step Senior Solutions, and we are going to discuss what that looks like, Jeff. So thanks for coming.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what brings you into senior living, because I know in your background you were a car salesman and you did a whole lot of things that did not belong in the senior living industry.
Yeah, so never car sales. I was a service
Okay.
advisor in the
Okay.
service department for a while because that's kind of the family business. So my dad
Yeah.
and my brother both come from that background. I actually did 16 years in telecommunications. So I've worked for a handful of mainly mobility companies.
Yeah.
And then life changes happened. A good friend of mine convinced me after a whole lot of fighting back and forth about whether I'd even show up for an interview to go in and interview for a position within senior living. So, which was the most interesting interview I've ever done in my life. And so they basically brought me in, sat me down with a group of ladies who were having lunch.
Yep.
And I spent an hour and a half learning about their history and, their journey to get to where they were. And it just grabbed me.
And we're talking senior ladies.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. So they were residents within an independent living. And I mean, concentration camps, Germany, just fascinating stories. And I sat down a 16-year career in telecommunications that day and accepted the position.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I just, I get gripped by the same things, that history, the wisdom that's behind so many of these people.
Yeah.
And it just kind of sucks you in, and you want to do what you can to bring light in those places where they may be a little bit of a darker time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the process that it takes to bring someone into an assisted living and what it might look like. Because sometimes it's not easy to make the decision to put your loved one into a care facility and then to walk away, and after you've moved them in is sometimes very difficult. So let's talk first about some of the paperwork that it requires. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to move into this assisted living and sign a lease and walk in. What do we need to do?
Yeah, so you'll once you've selected a community and gone through that process, it's very similar to renting an apartment. So if you've ever sat down and rented an apartment, the lease that you're going to be signing actually is almost identical in a lot of ways, legal terminology, to renting an apartment times 5.
Yes.
So
right.
once you've signed the first 20 to 40 pages, depending on the community you're moving into, then you get into photography releases and the ability to do the self-administration with medication and whatever host of things that organization has set forth. Healthcare releases, things like that.
Yeah. So you not only have the lease component of it, but you also have the healthcare component.
Correct.
So, and if you're going into an independent living, most of them only require the lease.
Right.
There are some that still want to take kind of a baseline look at where you are physically. So you can expect that in some independent livings.
Yeah, definitely not nearly as much.
Yeah.
But it is there.
But you're definitely going to expect it if you're looking at assisted living, if you're looking at a memory care, if you're looking at skilled nursing, they're going to need to do an assessment of your person.
Right.
So what does that kind of look like?
So generally, it's the director of nursing is going to meet with your loved one, meet with the family in most cases, and really talk about what their day looks like. What type of assistance do they need? Where's their struggles at? What are the things that they enjoy doing?
Yes.
What type of things can help them thrive in their new environment? Because they're really looking for those pieces. Some people like to stay in their room 100% of the time and watch old reruns of the Andy Griffith Show.
Right.
And some people are highly social and love to get out there and play bingo and do all the fun stuff that goes on.
And regardless of whether or not they like to stay in their room all the time, the goal of the community is actually going to be to try to get them out at least some of the time.
Correct.
We know that isolation it's a huge factor in people's quality of life and their overall health. So we are in our communities going to try to go and get your loved one and bring them out to interact, even if it's just for meal times, even if we
Sure.
can't get them to come to bingo and all the other stuff. Okay, but at least we're getting them out for some meals and helping them to not be so isolated.
Absolutely.
What about medications?
So medication, it's part of the paperwork you'll need to fill out. So on top of the lease agreement and all of the extra stuff that comes with that, generally you're signing up for what they call self-administration for medication. Really what that means is that the community has the medication in their control. It's locked on a med cart, and they're taking it to your loved one and saying, here's this medication which treats this, and they watch them take it.
Yes.
So they're not actually administering it as much as they are handing it to them and saying, here, take this for
Right. And in a
this.
skilled nursing facility, they can actually do the administration.
Correct.
In most of your assisted livings, they really need to still be able to get it into their mouth in some way. And sometimes that means they're using pudding and
Yeah.
applesauce, and they're hiding the meds. So if your loved one doesn't want to just pop a pill, there's other ways to
Sure.
help,
Absolutely.
help to administer that medication for sure.
They can get very creative.
Yes.
Absolutely.
The pudding was always my favorite.
Yeah. Applesauce is a common, if your loved one likes applesauce, that's going to be the first one that they often offer up.
Yeah. Applesauce, pudding, ice cream. I've seen it go in ice cream. So,
Yeah.
so back on track. Any other pieces of paper, any other forms that we might need to have filled out?
So primarily once you've got the 1823, which again comes from the doctor, so that is a paperwork that has to be filled out by your loved one's physician
Within how many
within
days?
30 days.
Okay,
So they have to have seen them within 30 days of filling it out. That paperwork is also generally good for 30 days once it's signed. So it is kind of at move-in time generally that you'll have that paperwork filled out.
Now, and I've seen this happen before, if it's really hard to get them in to see a physician, but you need to make this move sooner rather than later. I know that Next Step Senior Solutions in this North Central Florida area have several providers that they can get to go into the home if they need to. But for others, what might they do in order to speed up that process if they're in the state of Florida, but they're not here where we can help them here? Can you get that in an ER? Is that a possibility?
That's a great question.
I've
I
never
don't think you
asked.
can. And I think the logistics on that is that physician that would be filling it out has no history on you. And really what that 1823 is designed around is making sure that you can be cared for within a assisted living community.
Yeah.
What your diagnoses are, what medications you take. And in some cases, like an important piece to that is what your abilities are.
Right.
Can you get dressed on your own? Can you use the restroom on your own? Bathing. In memory care settings, a lot of times it's can you feed yourself?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
That's a big one. And that is actually going to adjust your level of care in some communities. Some communities may not be able to take somebody in their community that cannot feed themselves.
Absolutely.
Because that really does take them to a whole nother level of care.
Yeah. And I think the other piece to the emergency room portion is a hospital can fill those out. So one of the things that just to separate emergency room versus you've been admitted. Once you have a physician that's actually rounding to your hospital room, you've been admitted for multiple days, they're going to tweak your medications and things like that anyways. So those physicians will be able to fill that form out. But if you're simply going into the emergency room and going, hey, we're moving into a memory care and I need this paperwork, they're generally going to turn you away for that.
Yeah. So I want to talk about something that I think a lot of people struggle with. And you and I talked a little bit about it earlier. Sometimes because your person is no longer safe at home, and a lot of times there are cognitive issues that are involved, right? So your person can no longer make decisions for themselves. And at some point, they had the foresight to make you their caregiver. You're their power of attorney. You're their healthcare surrogate. And now it's kind of on you to make sure your person is safe. They have to go through that decision process of, okay, well, now we're going to need to find a great memory care or maybe an assisted living if they're not quite where they need memory care 100% yet. And I need to take mom or dad and make sure they're safe,
Right.
regardless of whether they want to go or not. And when they are bringing them to the front door, there are, I think, a couple of things that we need to talk about. One is the guilt level. You and I have seen many, many people, and most of them, would you say most of them feel a certain level of guilt?
Yeah, generally, and I've probably worked with close to 3,000 families at this point. And the number one thing I always discuss with the families during that process is that you're going to feel probably considerably more guilt and be affected more personally in that decision than your loved one will.
Yes.
So we do a lot of counseling on, here's what to expect, right? You're going to drop them off, they're going to have a warm welcome, they're going to roll out the red carpet. And one of the things they do in a lot of cases is try to separate that resident with their family early on, just in the welcoming period. So a lot of times you're going to have that nurse or that caregiver that comes up and says, welcome to our community. We're so happy to have you. Come take a walk with me. I want to show you some things.
Yes.
And that allows the administrator to have a little bit of time to get to know the family, because that communication is extremely important in the success of that transition. But it also, in a lot of opportunity or a lot of cases, they will use that as the way to say, okay, there's the door.
Yeah.
Let's give your loved one a little bit of time to settle in, make some friends, get comfortable. And then depending on every unique situation, they may say, come back in tomorrow. They may say, she seems to be struggling, or we know that this is going to be a difficult transition, depending on what level of dementia you're dealing with. Let's take a couple of weeks off. Or let me call you when I feel like she's adjusted to the community well enough that, she's not going to be wrapped around your leg, dragging her towards the door, begging you to take her with you.
And it gives staff that time to get to know your loved one as well. So what is wonderful about so many of our great assisted livings and memory care communities is that staff is compassionate, and they really want to meet the needs, and they really want to make your loved one's quality of life great. Yeah. And since they have shift change, they're not like you, where maybe you were on duty 24 hours a day. They get the opportunity to go home and get some rest and come back and be refreshed, hopefully. And so your loved one should be getting that contact with these people that want to get to know them well. Yeah. And will care about them.
Yeah. Most of your caregivers, I mean, a vast majority, and it's not 100% like it should be, and maybe it used to be in the old days, but the vast majority of them, they're not doing this because it's making them rich. They're not doing it because
definitely not.
They woke up one day and said, I want to go be a caregiver. These are life callings. Yeah. These people have cared for a loved one. They know what that looked like, and they really want to focus on making that person's transition and life within the community as happy and pleasurable as possible.
Yeah. So let's talk about some things that I think that you should do to help to prepare your loved one and to prepare the staff. I think that it's important to create some things that maybe will help the staff. And some communities are really good about asking for all this information, and they'll do it for you up front. Like, you may have a shadow box that's got, some key elements about your loved one's life that the staff can quickly look at and say, oh, here was your husband Carlos, and it looks like you used to be a secretary for someone pretty impressive. And it looks like you have 3 children, and they're all boys. What was that like growing up? And that gives them something that they can start to talk about, and it makes your person feel connected to them, even if they've never been connected before. So do you have any ideas and thoughts on that? Have you ever seen anything that's worked really well to bring in?
Yeah, I think one of the companies that I started out with did a phenomenal job and they called it the life story.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
they really did a great job of sitting down, whether it's the activities person or somebody within that organization would sit down and fill out this paperwork that says, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? What did you do for an
Mm-hmm.
occupation?
Yeah.
How many kids, how many siblings, where did you grow up? And I think that it's so important to the success of a memory care resident because you have to meet them where their journey is.
Yeah,
But if
you
you
do.
don't know anything about that journey, how can you meet them there?
Yeah.
So you'll see a lot of times that a memory care resident may be living within their 16-year-old self,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
or their 10-year-old self or their 30-year-old self at that point. And they're looking for their husband and their baby.
Yeah.
um,
Yep.
and if you don't know that life story, it makes it so much more challenging to meet them
Mm-hmm.
there because you're essentially agreeing with them rather than being able to say, "Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
saw that, baby Johnny yesterday was just fantastic. What a beautiful baby you have."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those little things like that make success so much easier.
Yeah. I remember I had a favorite one time, and
You're not supposed to have favorites, Julie.
well, I've had a few. But this particular gentleman, he really struggled with memory. And he knew somewhere in there he had people that he had loved dearly once upon a time. He had a wife, he had a daughter, and he just couldn't remember. And it used to frustrate him. He would say, I know there were people in my life. I just don't know who they are. I think I might have been married. I don't know. But he would get very agitated. And because I knew these basic things, I was able to take him back. He had a box, he had a memory box that
Yep.
family had put together. And we were able to look and say, oh, here's your daughter, Sally. I saw her the other day. She came in here. She's doing very well. She's a professor at UF, and her students love her. And here's a picture. I know you were wondering if you were married. You were married. Here's your beautiful wife. You got
Yeah.
married on Halloween. And who does that? And he
Yeah.
would start to laugh, and he would start to put the pieces together, even if it was only for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And the anxiety would leave. And that was such a gift to him, to have just those pieces that the staff members could pull out and say, yes, here's your life, and give that back to him for just a couple minutes.
Yeah.
So I always think that that is a wonderful gift if you can do that for your family members before you're taking them and dropping them off in a memory care. It's such a big blessing.
Yep.
Another thing that I want to talk about is caregivers a lot of times drop their loved one off and think, that's it, I'm done. I'm not a caregiver. I literally had a discussion with a very close friend the other day, and I mentioned that she and her husband are still caregivers, even though mom is in a skilled nursing facility now. And she goes, are we? Well, I guess I never thought of that. And I said, yeah, you are. And some of the reasons that I think it's important that we know that is because of accountability. Have you seen that happen in the communities where loved ones that are coming in regularly and they're offering that accountability, maybe it's a better outcome?
Yeah, I think the most important piece of that is I think everybody needs an advocate because there are, horror stories out there of, this community that didn't have great leadership or didn't have,
Yeah.
do a good job of hiring the right caregivers. There's obviously those pieces. So I think everybody needs an advocate.
Yep.
That family member that visits once or twice a week or every day in some cases, those are fantastic. And we certainly, I love to see when the family is
Yes.
highly involved and
Yeah.
even multiple family members, but it's really rare. Generally, it gets laid on one family member's lap to be
Yep.
that person. And again, I think it's the advocacy of being there, but also having open communication with the staff, because I think
For sure.
it's probably the biggest gap is even if you visit, you sneak in the front door, you sneak back out the front door, and really the only conversations you may have is with a caregiver. I tell a lot of the families we work with, there's care plan meetings every month where they are deciding how to best care for your loved one.
Yeah.
Be involved, right?
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
is the caregiver for my family member, and can I call in? What does that look like?
Yes.
How do I be a bigger part of that so that I can help make the decisions for it? And it opens up that platform for you to go, I've been here X amount of times a week, and I notice every time I come, my loved one's in the same outfit, or this hasn't changed, or the room doesn't look like it's tidied up enough.
Yeah.
And so most of the time it's easily explainable. I actually was just listening to a story recently where there was a loved one who their mom was all into this purple jumpsuit, right? And she was far down the
That's gonna be
dementia
me.
trail, and this purple jumpsuit was just what made her happy every day. So she went out and bought like 7 pairs of this same purple jumpsuit because that's what made her happy. And in that process, she's like, I'm going to burn these things after her mom passed away. She's like, if I never see another purple jumpsuit in my life, but if you weren't really involved, right? And your mom was always in a purple jumpsuit, but then your brother comes in who doesn't know that story and goes, my mom's in the same outfit she was in yesterday. A lot of those outfits look the same. And what you really want to do is make your loved one as comfortable as possible. And if that means purple jumpsuits 7 days a week, but another family member may not understand what's going on in that process.
Yes.
So that communication all the way around is what makes these communities successful for your loved one.
Yeah, I agree 110%. And then there's also, I was talking again to the same friend, and she was talking about how her husband had gone in every Sunday because it was Sunday, and she is no longer able to feed herself. And so he went in to feed her that ice cream.
Yeah.
The joy that he got when she was able to express joy by watching her joy was really and truly so memorable for him. He'll take that with him. And so he had done that every week. And, I thought about it. If he hadn't been able to do that, I know we're all short-staffed everywhere. And staff is committed to making sure your loved one gets fed 3 meals a day, right?
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily committed, or maybe they don't have enough hands to make sure your loved one gets that Sunday.
Yeah.
They're going to try their best, but they might not be able to. So those are things that you can do. You can definitely still be a caregiver in some ways and help out your loved one to still continue to have that quality of life.
No, totally agree.
So we talked about some things that you should bring. Let's talk about a couple things that you shouldn't bring.
Yeah.
I was recently in a facility, in a memory care facility, and someone had a toenail clipper, and he wasn't having the best day, and he had that little, that little hooky file part. He had that out, and he said, "Somebody is getting stabbed today."
Yeah. I brought my shiv.
Clearly, that was not supposed to be in there. And I've had people ask before, well, why can't I have toenail clippers for my loved one? Here's your sign.
Yeah.
Because you may have somebody who fought in a war one day and they're not having the best day, and we definitely don't want to provide them with a weapon.
Yeah.
What other things can you think of?
And I'll give you the list as well, but the one story that's always jumped out to me is we had a resident who was a charter captain. And throughout his days, storms and the change in barometric pressure meant a lot to him because his body reacted to it. And he would get violent during those days, but was just the sweetest human being possible when there wasn't a storm coming.
Wow.
And that's, like you said, if you've got a nail file that could be used in a bad way during a storm, becomes a weapon. So on the list, though, definitely the throw rugs are a big problem because it's a trip hazard. And I've had a lot of families go, well, I'll tape the corners down. Over time, corners, not corners, are going to get lifted up, and
or
it's
you
going
shove
to be a
that
problem.
foot underneath on accident and they're going down.
Heaters, anything that's electric, so coffee makers, anything like that, you're going to want to stay away from because of a burn or potential fire hazard. So
What about a fan?
I think it depends on the community, really.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing to ask because some
sure.
communities, depending on the level of memory care, is probably, if you're in memory care at that point, it's probably going to be a big deciding factor. If it's assisted living versus memory care, fans are going to be more readily acceptable, but you're still going to face the same coffee maker issue, right? They'll accept the coffee, the teacups. You can have one of those because
like a Keurig.
Like a Keurig.
Yeah, because you're not going to have a fire risk.
Because there's no burner to it to injure yourself. So anything that's sharp, I've seen cases where people have snuck firearms in,
Yeah,
pocket knives.
definitely not allowed.
Staff will confiscate those things
Mm-hmm.
immediately. So fingernail files is another good portion, So you want to bring just the basics, the things that are going to make them comfortable and happy.
And speaking of just the basics, I had a wonderful guy that had served in World War II, and he took his dress uniform, and it disappeared. And family was just beside themselves. And so I want to remind everyone, do not bring anything that is precious and of value. If you've got like a large engagement ring, you might want to consider taking that off and replacing with a small regular plain band, just in case it disappears.
Yeah.
We were able to recover his uniform. It was in someone else's closet because it's memory care, and sometimes things wander. And the family immediately took that home. But just a reminder not to bring precious things. Bring pictures of precious things if they really need that reminder, but do not.
And sometimes it's not even about precious as far as a monetary value.
No,
right?
it's just a sentimental value.
A sentimental value.
Yeah.
One of the things that I always talk to the families I've worked with and say, if this is going to affect you in a negative way, if it doesn't show up tomorrow, don't bring it, right?
Yeah,
And I've talked to a lot of families about costume jewelry. If you've got that 10 carat, ring that is worth $50,000 or whatever the case is, a lot of times you can find a cosmetic jewelry piece that is very similar to that.
Yes.
That's $200 and has no sentimental value. That's a great time to do something like that and maybe change it out with or without that loved one's knowledge, depending on where their cognitive abilities are. So there's things you can do that make them still feel like they have that sentimental piece that they've had their whole life,
and
even though it's maybe not the exact same one.
Yeah, if you don't have a lot of funds, you can probably go online and find something. But if you do have the funds, you do have a few $100s, you may want to visit a jeweler that can kind of recreate with a much less expensive stone and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I had a family I talked to not that long ago that had gone to like an antique mall, and obviously there's all these booths set up all over the place. It's a massive place, and they're walking around, and they had just stumbled upon one that looked very similar to their mom's wedding ring, and they purchased it. I think they paid $20 or $30 for it.
Great.
And then mom went to sleep one night, and they just subtly kind of made the switcheroo and locked that up in the safe, and it didn't go. I've also had the other side where somebody took those expensive rings, and then they grew feet. And it could be, and 99% of the time, it's in somebody else's room, hidden under clothes in a drawer, or just because of that cognitive,
Yeah. My grandmother actually threw hers all away.
Yeah.
She just, one day, didn't want them on her finger anymore, took them off, threw them away. We were very fortunate. My sister found them and rescued them. But that happens.
Yeah. And I'll tell you the one of the things, just to set like the expectation from the community, setting the expectation, the family getting that expectation, but false teeth and hearing aids are two of the big things. They may not need those teeth all of the time, but if they do, somebody with cognitive decline is generally not going to remember to put their teeth in every day.
Yes.
And sometimes they'll look at them and go, oh, those are gross. And they throw them in the garbage, and the garbage gets taken out. But those are things that are a constant struggle to keep up with.
Glasses as well. Glasses is another one. So you need to understand in your mind, the expectation is not necessarily that the staff members have misplaced or lost them. Sometimes it just happens that way. Yeah. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your being here. Jeff and I have known each other and worked together for years now. And if you back home have not liked this podcast yet and you have not subscribed, I would ask you to do that now. And then please make sure to share this with others. You never know who might need this. Thanks so much for coming to our podcast, Aging Gracefully with Julie Roca, and we'll see you the next time.